Sounil, thank you for coming here. Let's start by just kind of setting the stage a little bit on your background. Can you talk a little bit about your, I view you as an elder and a lifer in cybersecurity. Talk a little bit about your path.
I don't see myself as an elder, but I guess you're saying I'm old, which I guess is true. I've had computers I'm a digital native, despite the fact that I'm old. And I've had a good amount of experience across many different cybersecurity disciplines, including, by the way, I should say, threat intelligence. So I was part of the team that actually stood up our threat intelligence service when I was working at Booz Allen Hamilton. So I'm very familiar with the space around threat intel and a lot of the folks who do that here as well. But anyway, so
the bio here says you have 30 years of experience creating, breaking, fixing. A little bit, can you shed a little bit of light on what some of the things you've done over the years?
Sure. Well, I think I guess my journey probably is very similar to most others in terms of you start by, as an engineer, you start by taking apart something to see how it works. And so you figure out how it works, then you reassemble it. Sometimes not everything fits back together, but you reassemble it and make it better. And hopefully you make it better while it's still working. And so whether it's a computer system or a network or an application, that's something that I just did growing up throughout my career, as well as when I was a kid. More recently, I was the chief security scientist at Bank of America. And in that role, one of the things that I had a chance to do, in addition to building new capabilities, I had the responsibility of looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of security startups and trying to understand what they do. Because part of my role was to onboard these companies and give them a try to see whether or not their AI-enabled dark quantum blockchains actually work and help us secure our environment. And as you may imagine, most of them were vaporware, but just understanding what problem they're trying to solve and how it fits into our portfolio was something that I was in charge of doing at Bank of America.
This segues perfectly into the cyber defense matrix, which I'm a big fan of. I know a lot of CISOs are kind of using the cyber defense matrix to match things in their security programs and even modernize and build out their security programs. You're at Bank of America, you're being bombarded with vendors, selling shiny toys, machine learning, blockchain, everything. And you decided you had to be, and this was the impetus for the cyber defense matrix. I have the cyber defense matrix up on the screen now. Can you spend a minute explaining what the cyber defense matrix is? And again, for the folks listening, keep in mind that this was created by Sounil at the time of Bank of America just to deal with a barrage of vendors coming in.
Yeah. So the challenge that we face is all we see in the security community is a bunch of buzzwords. And the buzzwords don't really help us actually fundamentally understand what problem we're solving and whether or not we're solving them in a way that gives us a view of completeness. Are we actually tackling all the problems that we need to tackle? What is the space of things that we need to tackle? And oftentimes when it comes to security, missing that one thing is what bites us in the butt. So to have a sense of completeness or a sense of what is a holistic view of a security program, I came up with this model, which is a pretty simple construct. One dimension are the things that we care about, devices and endpoints, servers, those kind of things, applications, networks, data, and users. And the other dimension then being the NIST cybersecurity framework and the 5 functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework. So identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And it comes up with this nice bingo card that you can use to then figure out what a particular vendor does. But along the way, I discovered a whole bunch of other use cases for it. And it turns out that there's an immense amount of richness that you can unpack out of the matrix. And if you search on Cyber Defense Matrix, you'll find some content that I have online that points to many of the use cases that are out there.
The idea here is you're using this to kind of dartboard vendors or capabilities within this. And I like this slide as well. This slide really puts it into context of left and right of boom. Explain this here and explain why you separate it this way.
Sure. So I borrowed the term from from the military, actually. So boom happens to be an IED exploding. And one of the things that the U.S. military tried to do was to get to the left of boom. So boom happens, you want to avoid boom, so how do you get to left of boom? And this concept of having a sense of what is left and right of boom is where this emerged. With respect to this dichotomy, what's important is to understand what problem we're trying to solve based on whether you're left or right of boom. And there's simple things that emerge as a result of this, and it helps us understand language a little better. So for example, this is a common misunderstanding that we as practitioners have. Let's say vulnerabilities. Do we identify vulnerabilities or do we detect vulnerabilities? And in the English language, the two words are mostly synonymous, but functionally they're very different, depending upon whether you're left or right of boom. And so vulnerabilities is something that provides, or discovering vulnerabilities is basically finding structural weaknesses. Whereas the exploitation against vulnerabilities, you want to have situational awareness. And so when it comes to, let's say, the discovery of vulnerabilities, that's on the left of boom. But so we should use the word identify when it comes to looking for vulnerabilities. But when it comes to looking for exploitations against vulnerabilities, we should be using the word detect. And so this sort of construct helps us really normalize our language and help us understand exactly what we're doing. The other thing that's also important with respect to this is just what you see on the bottom with respect to the degree of dependency on people, process, and technology. And the thing that we want to be able to be cognizant of is to always remember that there is some degree of people involved in performing the functions of detect, respond, and recover. And despite all the automation that vendors may come to us with saying, we can replace all your people, that's actually not the case. And so the framework helps us keep that in mind as we look at solving problems on the left of boom versus the right of boom.
Can I use this framework to get around vendor hype around I'm a platform? How can I determine if you're actually a platform, a point product, and like how did you do it when you were trying to figure out this?
Sure, great question. So yes, everyone wants to be a platform, but just calling yourself a platform doesn't really make you one. What defines a platform? And actually, to me, it's very visually obvious. So you are a platform when you cross over a set of capabilities either horizontally or vertically, okay? But it depends actually whether or not you are left or right of boom as well. So typically, if you have a capability that starts off on the left side of boom, you will tend to build a platform that's more horizontal in nature, okay? So the reason why is because oftentimes you're dealing with the same customer set, you're dealing with the same environment, and so it just makes sense for you to expand horizontally. A great example would be, let's say, endpoint protection. As a part of that, you start off with sensors that you deploy on the endpoint. And then with that sensor, you gain visibility, you gain telemetry, you gain insights on what's going on, and then you do the protect, detect, respond, and as you go across. If you happen to start on the right side of boom, what typically happens is you build analytic platforms, let's say for detection purposes. And then those analytic platforms have use cases. Can you use a certain analytic platform, let's say a log analysis tool, to do detection on endpoints? Sure, that's a use case of endpoint detection. Could you use logs from the network to do network traffic analysis? Yeah, sure. And can you use those logs to also do insider threat analysis? Absolutely. And so what we see on the right side of boom is a vertical integration of capabilities and expansion of capabilities to round out a platform that is made up of multiple use cases.
And the next slide, I'm going to let build out because I think the audience will get a kick out of seeing what the security industry looks like put up against this cyber defense matrix. And I'm glad you brought up the point of, I'm glad we kind of set the stage with left of boom, right of boom, people, technology, processes, because as this builds out, the obvious thing we notice is that there's a lot of much on identify and protect top left side of the grid. And we're identifying and protecting threats against device applications, networks, data, and users. It's all heavily pre-situation. And on the right side, it's blank, right? Is it because we cannot solve problems with people? The technology obviously skews that way. Help me understand what's happening here and why there's a massive part of the grid white. Is cybersecurity just looking at the wrong things?
Sure. So, and by the way, there's one caveat, of course, is, well, there's a number of caveats with this grid. One is I reserve the right to change my mind on any of the mappings. So if there's something wrong, I'm happy to change it or adjust it. Some of the mappings that you see there are from a while back when I was first looking at what's the right mapping for these things. The second thing is that just because something's in the box doesn't necessarily mean that space is fully covered. There's a lot of dimensionality to this matrix that is not seen here. And so there's a lot of nuances of what exactly means full coverage inside a given box. But that's not here or there. There's more detail there. But
for the purpose of this, can you just define respond and recover, just so we understand what this blankness looks like?
Yeah. So ultimately, the question of why are there so few technologies on the right? And part of what you see on the bottom with that degree of dependency, the curve that you see was based on initially some evidence like this that says why are there so few technologies? But I wasn't sure if that was the cause of the curve that you see on the bottom, or if that's a result of, or rather, I wasn't sure which part was causal. Is it because our degree of dependency changes in the way that you see on the bottom, or is it because there's just few technologies that are on the market? And I have some theories in terms of why I think that's the case, and I have pretty good evidence on why I think the degree of dependency on the bottom is actually correct as you see it there. So as you go to the right, what we'll see is essentially where technology it can only perform a certain set of functions, and it really becomes people that have to address the challenges that we see on the right side of the equation. Think about it from the standpoint of threat actors. Threat actors actually, how are they successful? They get around the technology controls that we have. Once they get around the technology controls, you can't necessarily apply the same technology controls again to try to to stop them. You need to leverage the minds of people to figure out how other people have gotten around our technology controls. And so on the right side of boom, we have a greater degree of dependency on people. But there's still going to be technology there. And I think what's interesting is that the security community or the security vendor community has largely been absent in that space around coming up with the right kind of technologies that help us address those particular problems. Because there's still technology to be brought to bear. It's just not as prevalent as you may think.
Is there a question here about what venture capitalists are funding? And I know you're now CISO-in-residence at YL Ventures, which is a VC firm. Are we seeing a heavy push among venture capitalists to go after proven things rather than this respond, recover, people-heavy place that might not? I don't know. I'm trying to understand why on a funding side, if that's an issue.
Right. So ultimately, venture capitalists or the tech community wants to build tech that scales, right? And so as you go to the right side of the matrix, you're going to see clearly less technology being brought to bear. And so you start questioning what's the total addressable market in some of these spaces on the right side of boom. And ultimately, the venture capitalists need to, they have a responsibility to have a return for their investors. And so their decision-making processes ultimately weigh into what spaces they cover. My role within YL Ventures is actually to help seed ideas on all parts of the matrix, and my particular interest is actually just to drive more capabilities where there are gaps, capabilities where we as practitioners really do need them. And as I think about the type of solutions that are on the right side of boom, I have discovered a certain pattern that emerges that we see a slide on here. So if you think about all the things that we do in security up until more recently, they're mostly focused on trying to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of our systems. That's the CIA triad that everyone in security should generally be familiar with. But I have a new set of paradigms that I've discovered that are common in the solutions, the newer type of solutions that I see on the far right. the things that focus on our ability to recover. And those three attributes are distributed, immutable, and ephemeral, or DIE. And so I'm seeing the emergence of solutions that have one or more of these attributes. And what's fascinating is that each attribute of DIE counters the need for CIA. And it's an interesting pattern that's emerged that helps us then understand what are the type of solutions that we should be designing towards or building towards, and to focus on these three principles as opposed to having to always worry about confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Are you energized by seeing entrepreneurs and venture capitalists and the folks doing this, going in this direction? Because I know you've talked in the past about the 2020s being this era of recovery and moving to respond and recover. Can you share some examples of things that you're excited about, either at YL or elsewhere, that ties to this and it gives us some confidence that as an industry, innovation is moving in the right direction?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting is that the innovation that's moving, a lot of this is actually not driven by security. They're driven by the business that wants greater agility. And to the degree that the security community or security vendors can offer solutions that actually help drive the business faster and more efficiently, that's actually where I'm really excited. Where you have security capabilities where you have capabilities that have a inherent benefit to security, but have a greater benefit actually to the business itself. And to the degree that we can identify solutions that will align this way, what actually also happens is the buyer becomes the business side and not the security side. So right today, most of the times we have to convince the business side to go install this or put something in. Tomorrow, I think they're going to want to, if we do this right, then they're going to want to do this. And again, security becomes a beneficiary instead. So the type of solutions that we're seeing, though, in the marketplace that have DIE attributes, some of them are buzzwordy. So like, for example, like blockchain, okay. Blockchain is immutable and it's distributed. It has the D and the I aspect of things. And it's a very resilient ledger, a distributed ledger that I don't have to convince the business to go and implement because they are very excited about looking at blockchain technologies to change out old deprecated systems that aren't as distributed and as easy to manage.
All right, now we can get rid of the slides and have a fireside conversation. I asked Mike Lennon to put up some nice fire with crackling music in the background, but apparently we couldn't get it to work. But Sounil, there's a lot of questions in the industry. We're just right into post-COVID world. There's two worlds: pre-COVID, post-COVID, and I think this applies to the security industry. A lot of my peers, a lot of folks are asking the obvious question: oh my God, is my job safe? Am I going to be laid off? How does the security industry navigate COVID? With your years of experience, let the folks understand what will happen in the next 6 months. Very direct question. What will happen in the next 6 months in your kind of futuristic guessing? And what will happen in a year? On that very specific question, am I going to lose my job?
Well, security is one of those jobs that are generally recession-proof, but of course, it's tied to the business. If your business if the company that you work for goes out of business or has to tighten their belt, then whether you're security or in the front lines, it may not matter, right? So it's really industry dependent. But as it relates to spending in security, that is actually going up.
Oh, wait a second. If it's industry dependent, give me some industries that you think is well poised and positioned to kind of rally through this, and some that you should be nervous about. I mean, let's try to real talk for the folks.
Sure. So someone just asked the question: is Ryan losing his job or not? People who are in events, right? That they're struggling because you can't have events that are in person. But that said, I mean, I think there are opportunities like this, of course. But travel, anything that's travel, entertainment, things that require people to be in person, that's gonna be the challenge for the near term. But I was looking at a survey recently among CIOs around this is post-COVID now. What are you going to be spending on? What are your big budget items going to be? How are you recalibrating? And it's cloud and security. Those are the two items that are still they're going to spend on. And when it comes to cutting your budget, I mean, one of the most defensible budget line items is going to be security. And if you consider all the things that have happened in the current during the current time with respect to the attacks that we're seeing, I think there's a pretty compelling reason to continue to have a security budget that, despite the shrinkage of overall budgets, that we still pay attention to. So I'm actually generally bullish on the security community or the security spend and the security teams that we have out there.
What are you hearing from entrepreneurs and entrepreneur startups on the hiring front? Have hiring been put on pause? Are people going on as normal? What can we expect as it relates to the folks in our industry who are like maybe between jobs, maybe thinking about moving around? Where do you see things?
Sure. So as it relates to hiring, one thing that's definitely being curtailed would be on the sales side, right? Because it's hard to do sales in this sort of fashion. But there is a doubling down on the R&D side, building the capability. So I, as a buyer, I couldn't be more happy, right? I get fewer sales emails and fewer sales calls, and people are actually spending time building product. So I think likewise with most startups, as they really hunker down to get past this crisis, what they want to be able to come out of is a real capability that people want. And to that end, that's a great outcome in my view.
What is happening is that there's this forced digital transformation. Businesses are being forced to, migrate to the cloud, modernize, move to different types of technologies. That's obviously a good thing in the grand scheme of things. We are, in a very general sense, getting better. Where does security fit in this forced transformation? Do you see this setting us up as this retrenchment-proof sector?
Sure. So the digital transfer. So let's talk about what do we mean by digital transformation. So one, of course, is more people using digital technologies to do their work. And one major point of resistance up until COVID was a lot of people. And some of this can be generational, but a lot of people who are just not willing to use the technologies that were available to do the work that they wanted to do. Come COVID, we now have this rapid transformation where people now have to go digitally to do a lot of the things that they thought they weren't able to do or didn't want to do those digital platforms. Now, here's the thing, though. I can't speak for every organization, of course, but I can envision what may have happened for some organizations, which is we now have all these people who need to get online. And before, we would set a bar that says, let's say it's this high, okay? Two-factor authentication, maybe even hard tokens to be able to get in. We'll just use the hard tokens as an example. Okay, everyone goes off home. Do you think we'll have hard tokens for everyone? Of course not, right? People may say, okay, let's just use soft tokens. And that may take us from here to here, right? Or we have people who can't even install soft tokens. So now what about 2FA? Okay, well, maybe that we use their SMS. Okay, and so again, it drops another layer. Or some people don't have a cell phone. What do you do then? And anyway, bottom line is that as we look at what we're doing to address the digital transformation, we are going to have to make businesses will have to make some trade-offs, right? Around how do I get these people back to work despite some of the policies and restrictions that we as security people would want to have as it pertains to the security controls for remote access. And for every step that we take down on remote access, that gives a window of opportunity for attackers, right? So they'll take advantage of whatever downgrades that we make in remote access constraints to then take over somebody's account, password, whether it's password reuse or any other mechanism that we may have seen. And I don't know if you saw the recent articles about increased activity after people have patched their Pulse Secure VPN. We're seeing attackers log into them and doing malicious things. So I think we'll see that ramp up over the next few weeks and months until people can bring that control back up to what they expect. Hopefully, along the way, we don't lose people, right? As we bring up back those controls that we want, we don't have people who are turned off. Rather, we would hope that we have people who say, "Oh, I get this. This makes sense, and I'm comfortable with this new these digital tools that are available to me."
I'm glad you brought up people, because that was the next thing on my list here is, how do you think post-COVID world, retrenchment, layoffs, all this turmoil affects this cybersecurity personnel shortage that we've been making a lot of noise about? Do you expect that gets better or worse? Do we have more talent to choose from, or do we have talent fragmenting into places that we may never get back?
So my answer to that is a lot more nuanced, in that I've actually, so going back to that DIE concept earlier, the other analogy oftentimes used in describing DIE is that when you build, for those who are familiar with cloud native terms, one of the terms that we oftentimes use in that space is this notion of pets and cattle. Pets and cattle. And pets are things that we care about. We give it a name. When it gets sick, we take it to the vet. Cattle, we give it some obscure name that you can't even pronounce. And when it gets sick, we shoot it and we move on. Cattle, you CIA. Cattle, you need to make sure the confidentiality, sorry, not cattle, pets. Pets, you need to CIA. So pets, you need to worry about the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those things that we consider to be pets. When it has a vulnerability, we patch it. We make sure that the data on it is safe, and so on and so forth. Cattle, on the other hand, you build to be distributed, immutable, and ephemeral. So when it comes to the workforce issue, is the issue that we have too few workers, or that we have too many pets? Do we have too many pets, or not enough cyber veterinarians? And I would argue the bigger issue is that we have too many pets. And one of the things I really, really hope for in the digital transformation is that we shoot a lot of pets. And so if we can shoot a lot of pets at the end of the day, then the workforce shortage that we have right now could potentially be addressed, perhaps even better than it would be if we just hired a bunch of more veterinarians. So that's one hope that I have. Now, at the end of the day, though, we're still going to have pets, and we're going to still need people to take care of those pets. Will the current situation exacerbate that, or make it easier because we now have more people perhaps that are hireable? Well, one thing that I hope people recognize is there are some jobs that our cybersecurity jobs, in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot of people who've lost their jobs, unfortunately, due to the coronavirus. And there's very few, I think, in the security community that have. And so I would hope that becomes a draw, where people would say, yeah, I want that kind of job, because it sucks to be out of a job.
Thank you, Sounil. We're running out of time. I think we have barely 2 minutes left. I wanted to ask one question. There's some questions coming in from the audience. We're kind of touching on them, but there's one here on the VC side. Now that you're a VC, I can make fun of you for being a VC. On the VC side, how much of this uncertainty is just an opportunity for you guys to shortchange startups in their next valuation? And is that a real thing? If you're in between fundraising now, is that a real thing where you want to step back, and how do you navigate this crazy work?
Well, for one, I don't count myself as a VC, so you can make fun of me as much as you want. But I do angel investing, and so I guess the question around shortchanging startups, I get the snark in it, but the real question is around how have your investment thesis or your thinking changed in terms of what you choose to invest in. And there was a huge, the market was already in desperate need for recalibration anyway, a correction. And so this basically kind of forces us to rethink that and say, does it make sense for us to invest in a company that has no product, that's basically pre-product and doesn't really have much of an idea. And the answer is it depends. In some cases, we invest on. I invest based on the people, right? We have people who are repeat entrepreneurs and they're great at building companies and they solve really hard problems. And so we absolutely want to be able to say, hey, yes, come. We're more than happy to have you come in and talk to us and potentially fund you. But if you've already been funded and your runway's running short and you need more money, well, it's probably not a great time to be in. If you're an Israeli entrepreneur and you have a great idea, definitely call me. Actually, if you're an entrepreneur, a security entrepreneur, and you have a great idea, I would love to hear it out. That's largely what my role is, and I thoroughly enjoy doing that.